revolutionize existing astronomical concepts. It may be said in this connection that scientific evolution, which does not specially aim at destroying previous supposed knowledge, although it does so in the end, is the result of the progressive influence of the age which makes it inevitable. And if the change, therefore, had not taken place today, it would unavoidably have occurred sooner or later in the course of time. The system of gravitation which makes the sun the moving center of the universe, the awkward principles of which are anything but certain since they apply to invisible circumstances so that they cannot be checked, is here replaced by the old geocentric system, universally accepted until the 17th century, in view, of course, of its undisputable obviousness, and in which the Earth, in a state of immobility and surrounded by the planets visibly moving around it, including the sun, is at the center of our universe. It has been said that there is nothing new under the sun, but it could be added, except the manner of interpreting those very facts, which, indeed, are not new. Thus, this system comprises two important features already known to the ancients, which had been inconsiderately discarded or even completely ignored, but which, by a different interpretation put on data obtained through certain modern discoveries, have been recognized to be absolutely true in spite of their apparent improbability. These two facts, which explain almost everything, are firstly, the positive existence above the Earth of a solid dome, constituting the sky, and secondly, the non-material nature of the planets and constellations, which are not physical masses, but merely luminous manifestations without substance. These are the two circumstances which lead today to the fundamental transformation. Further, the study of non-European cosmographies has provided a fresh outlook on the problem of the universe, and has furnished logical solutions to certain astronomical phenomena which could not be explained in the past. It is obvious that this work is incomplete, and also that it may be improved. It is therefore hoped that the assistance of various technicians, particularly in the field of optics, will help in due course to solve the remaining problems, as the important thing is not to try and prove one's infallibility, but to arrive at the truth. It is usual in the exposition of a new system to try and disprove the preceding theories which are now considered to be impracticable and obsolete, and it is to this end that the comments on gravitation and other hypotheses have been made. They should not be regarded as being directed against anyone in particular. The author acknowledges her indebtedness to all those who from the earliest times throughout the ages have, by their accumulated labor and efforts, made possible the realization of this work today. On the non-revolution of the Earth round the Sun, and on the existence of a summer and of a winter cosmic breath stream. From Heaven and Earth by Gabrielle Henriette. Copernicus put forward the hypothesis of the revolution of the Earth round the Sun in order to explain the cycle of the seasons. His theory is not very satisfactory, seeing that the Earth is supposed to be at its greatest distance from the Sun in the summer during the hot weather, and at its shortest distance in the winter when the temperature is at its lowest. These unusual conditions, which clearly contradict the laws of nature as regards the effect of heat, are, it is said, due to the angle formed by the rays of the Sun as they fall on the Earth's surface. It is also stated that the opposition of the seasons north and south of the equator is due to a tilt of the Earth, first on one side and then on the other, which conveniently occurs at the right moment. Nothing is said, however, of the shifting of the waters of the sea and rivers which this change in the center of gravity and in the position of the Earth would inevitably bring twice a year. It might also be assumed that under those conditions, very high constructions would swerve from the vertical. The American skyscrapers and the Eiffel Tower, for instance, cannot be seen to lean right or left according to the seasons, although this should be a logical and natural consequence of the alternate inclination attributed to the Earth. It must reasonably be said that the circumstances which readily explain in the most extraordinary and unlikely way the cause of the seasons are not credible, especially in view of the fact that Copernicus, when he published his theories on the movement of the Earth in his treatise on the revolution of the celestial spheres in 1543, insisted on their purely hypothetical nature. He said, "The hypothesis of the movement of the Earth is only one which is useful to explain phenomena, but it should not be considered as an absolute truth." It was never his intention, it seems, that his theory should be taken in earnest by his successors. The motion of the Earth in space can be disproved by a comparison between the supposed speed of the Earth and that of the other planets. If we base our considerations on the principle that a body in motion creates an apparent speed equal to its own in bodies it encounters, which is usually demonstrated by the experiment of a moving vehicle such as a train, It is difficult to judge at first sight whether it's the train or what can be seen outside it which is moving away. But one fact is certain, that the two speeds, one of which is real and the other is apparent, are equal. For this reason, if the Earth were in motion, it would create in the planets and constellations an initial apparent speed equal to its own. Consequently, there can be no speed in the heavens lower than that of the Earth, since it represents a basic speed from which the apparent motions would be derived. But as it can be seen, the displacement of the constellations and of the planets, with the exception of Mercury and Venus, is slower than the supposed speed of the Earth, which under the circumstances stated above is a material impossibility. It should moreover be considered that the real speeds of the planets have to be added to the apparent motions created by the supposed movement of the Earth, with the result that the planets ought to pass before us like a flash of lightning. The absence of these mathematical circumstances, which surely have no reason to be invisible, ought to be sufficient to prove that the hypothesis of the revolution of the Earth round the Sun, as put forward by Copernicus, has no basis in fact and is not admissible, even if such theory could not be replaced by anything more logical, as it is. An entirely different and more rational explanation of the cycle of the seasons, based on a reasoned investigation of existing conditions can, however, be given, so that it will no longer be necessary to send the Earth traveling into space to this end. The essential feature of the year is its division into two equal periods of 6 months, based first on the predominating length of the days over that of the nights, and vice versa. Conditions which are governed by the varying hours of sunrise and sunset, and secondly, by either high or low height reached by the sun in the heavens at midday. The first cycle, during which the days are longer than the nights and the sun reaches its culminating point of the year, extends from the spring equinox to the autumn equinox, i.e. March 21 to September 22. And the second cycle, during which, inversely, the duration of the nights exceeds that of the days, and the sun descends to its lowest point of the year, extends from the autumn equinox to the spring equinox, i.e. September 23 to March 20. These two 6-month periods are also characterized by an opposition of temperature. During the first cycle, which corresponds to spring and summer, the heat gradually rises and falls, while during the second cycle, which comprises autumn and winter, it is the intensity of the cold which progressively increases and decreases. It might be said that it is evident that the heat of the summer and the low temperatures of the winter result from either the high or low heat reached by the sun at midday, and also from the alternate predominating length of the days over the nights. Although it might not be absolutely certain that the variations of temperature are entirely due to these particular circumstances. To what reason must be attributed the variations which exist in regard to the sun's daily height and the hours at which it rises and sets? Which seem to determine the various temperatures of the year. These regular fluctuations must necessarily have an origin, and it might be remarked that no scientific research or speculation has ever been attempted in this direction. The sun has been compared by the ancients to a chariot drawn by steeds and to a boat manned by rowers, meaning by this that it is not self-propelled. Its movement, therefore, is derived from some external power, and in that case it would appear that the variations in the height of the sun and its hours of rising and setting are due to the passage and to the impulsion of two regular successive currents, or cosmic breath streams of 6 months each, i.e. a warm increasing and decreasing breath stream prevailing from the spring equinox to the autumn equinox, followed by a cold, increasing and decreasing breath stream from autumn to spring. And the conclusion is that the impulse of these two summer and winter cosmic breaths govern the height of the sun, and that they also have the effect of either advancing or retarding the hours of sunrise and sunset, on which depend their respective lengths of days and nights. So it's interesting to note here, it may not be that the cosmic breath streams are governing the height of the sun, but they may be a function of the height of the sun. It is therefore the arrival and growing intensity of the warm summer breath stream which from March 21 causes the sun to gradually ascend to its culminating point of the year at the June solstice, and the decreasing intensity of the same warm stream which, after the solstice, causes the height of the sun to decline steadily until 22 September, the moment of the equinox, when the cold current sets in. At the same time, the impulse of this warm cosmic stream has the effect of advancing the hour of sunrise and retarding that of sunset, so that the days become longer than the nights. On the other hand, it is the arrival and growing intensity of the cold winter breath stream about the 23rd September which causes the sun to further descend to its lowest point of the year at December solstice, and the decreasing intensity of this cold breath which, after the winter solstice, causes the sun to rise again until 21 March, when the warm breath takes over. At the same time, the cold current has the effect of retarding the hour of sunrise and of advancing the sunset, whereby nights become longer than the days. As it can be seen, these two semi-annual cosmic streams or currents, warm and cold, each represent a complete breath comprising a rising phase of inspiration from the equinox to the solstice, and a following phase of expiration from the solstice to the following equinox. And it's these two double phases of a duration of 3 months each, controlling the daily height of the sun and the hours of its rising and setting, which causes the 4 seasons. It may be explained that the principle of the existence of cosmic breaths is not new, and that it is to be found in the cosmogonies of the Orient. It has, here in particular, been borrowed from a French translation of Hindu texts in which the movement of the sun was said to respond to the influence of universal streams of breath. The author has adapted this theory to existing circumstances, thus permitting the specific respiratory nature of these cosmic breaths to be discovered. This fact is completely demonstrated apart from the obvious parallel of the phases of inspiration and expiration rhythmically governing the lengths of days and nights and the height of the sun, by a comparison with another factor, which is the pause existing between inspiration and expiration. This pause is precisely reproduced by the solstice, which corresponds to the stoppage of the cosmic breath between the two phases. The existence of a breath governing the movement of the sun becomes here manifest, since the height of the latter at midday does not vary during the solstice interval, nor do the hours of its rising and setting. The respective lengths of the day and of the night remain unchanged, the sun rising and setting at the same hours for no less than 5 days. It could be added, as further proof of the existence of a cosmic breath, that the high temperatures of July and August, which are really abnormal, since it should be cooler as they occur when the days become shorter and the height of the sun decreases, that they are due, in fact, as in the function of respiration, the pressure of the breathing out is greater towards the middle of the expiration phase, and consequently the temperature rises. On the other hand, it is observed that the cold becomes more intense in January and February, although the days are growing longer and the decrease in the intensity of the cold breath is causing the sun to rise. This recrudescence of the cold is due to the same reason of pressure increase in the middle of the phase of expiration, and the cosmic breath being cold, it follows that there is a further drop of temperature during this period, from which it can be seen that the pressure of the respective cosmic breath streams is susceptible of warming or cooling in the atmosphere, as the case may be, regardless of the height of the sun. It may be remarked that during the time of the solstices, when the height of the sun at midday is stabilized for a few days, either at its highest or lowest point in the heavens, man, by reflex, follows the cosmic conditions by stopping his working activities and taking a rest in fall. These particular moments are also the occasion of great religious Christic festivals, Christmas at the winter solstice and Corpus Christi at the time of the summer solstice, which points undoubtedly to the existence of an association between the sun and Christ. This association exists also in the case of the Easter festival of the resurrection of Christ, which in reality celebrates the solar new year. Easter takes place on the Sunday following the new moon, after the spring equinox on March 21, which date marks the beginning of the spring and summer cycle of the sun, when the height of the latter at noon begins to rise over the equator according to the actual astronomical way of reckoning the solar declination. It is also obvious that the opposition of the seasons north and south of the equator result from a corresponding opposition in the circulation of the two breaths round the Earth, i.e. when the warm breath is in the northern hemisphere, the cold one is in the other, and vice versa, so that it is simultaneously summer in one part of the world and winter in the other. Thus, the warm 6-month breath which commenced in the northern hemisphere at the spring equinox comes to an end at the autumn equinox, about the 22nd of September, when the transposition of the warm and cold breath takes place. The warm breath passes in the southern hemisphere for the spring-summer cycle, and at the same time the cold breath leaving said hemisphere enters ours for the autumn-winter cycle. The respective intensities of the two breaths, both at the end of their expiration phase at the moment, are, thus, equalized, so as to permit their transposition. And at the same time, the lengths of the day and night find themselves also equalized to 12 hours each in both hemispheres. It is also most probable that the atmospheric disturbances which prevail at the time of the equinoxes are due to the mutual replacement of the breaths, and to their passage in a different part of the world. It should be added, however, that in the above theory concerning the cycle of the seasons, the cosmic breaths do not act directly on the sun, but that there are intermediate circumstances which will be dealt with later on with regard to the origin itself of the sun. On the fact that the Earth does not rotate, and on the existence of a day and of a night cosmic breath stream. Copernicus had evolved another theory, which he also explains in his treatise on the revolution of the celestial spheres. That if a body is to revolve around another, the first one must have a spherical shape and rotate about its axis in the manner of a spinning top. Consequently, in order to make this notion fit in with the movement of the Earth around the sun, which he had devised in order to explain the seasons, he suddenly decreed that the Earth was round, contrary to the general opinion at the time, and then proclaimed that it had a movement of rotation about its axis. The great inconvenience in this proposition is that the rotation of the Earth cannot be seen to exist, either with regard to the position of the sun, or clouds during the day, or of the moon and other planets by night. On the other hand, the fact of the immobility of the Earth has an immense advantage over the theory of the rotation, in that it can positively be recognized as such, and it can safely be said that if the Earth cannot be seen to move, there are 100 chances in 100 that it does not do so. The theory of the rotation of the Earth, however, may once for all be definitely disposed of as impracticable by pointing out the following inadvertence. It is said that the rotation takes 24 hours, and that its speed is uniform, in which case necessarily days and nights should have an identical duration of 12 hours each all the year round. The sun should invariably rise in the morning and set in the evening at the same hours, with the result that it would be the equinox every day from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. One should stop and reflect on this before saying that the Earth has a movement of rotation. How does the system of gravitation account for the seasonal variations in the lengths of days and nights, if the Earth rotates at a uniform speed in 24 hours? At all events, we have previously seen that there is no such movement, as the revolution of the Earth round the sun, and as the rotation was its sine qua non, it automatically fails at the same time. There is also reciprocal invalidity, if the rotation is manifestly impossible as demonstrated above. The translation which was uniquely derived from this movement becomes void. Further, if flying had been invented at the time of Copernicus, there is no doubt that he would have soon realized that his contention regarding the rotation of the Earth was wrong, on account of the relation existing between the speed of an aircraft and that of the Earth's rotation. The distance covered by an aircraft would be reduced or increased by the speed of the rotation according to whether such aircraft traveled in the same direction or against it. Thus, if the Earth rotates as it is said at 1,000 kilometers an hour, and a plane flies in the same direction at only 500 kilometers, it is obvious that its place of destination will be farther removed every minute. And on the other hand, if flying took place in the direction opposite to that of the rotation, a distance of 1,500 kilometers would be covered in 1 hour, instead of 500, since the speed of the rotation is to be added to that of the plane. It could also be pointed out that such a flying speed of 1,000 kilometers an hour, which is supposed to be that of the Earth's rotation, has recently been achieved, so that an aircraft flying at this rate, in the same direction as that of the rotation, could not cover any ground at all. It would remain suspended in mid-air over the spot from which it took off, since both speeds are equal. There would, in addition, be no need to fly from one place to another, situated on the same latitude. The aircraft could just rise and wait for the desired country to arrive in the ordinary course of the rotation, and then land, although it is difficult to see how any plane can manage to touch ground at all on an airfield which is slipping away at the rate of 1,000 kilometers an hour. It might certainly be useful to know what people who fly think of the rotation of the Earth. It could also be said that if the Earth did not rotate, such motion, as in the case of its assumed revolution round the sun, would create in all directions apparent, fast, and erratic movements of the planets and constellations, whereas, in fact, the movements ruling in the heavens are extremely slow and perfectly orderly, and notwithstanding the artless explanation that has been offered, that everything goes so fast that nothing can be seen to move at all. It has also been endeavored to explain day and night, probably by way of giving an opportune and additional utility to the rotation. apart from its indispensable role in the assumed revolution round the sun, by the fact that the two halves of the earth are alternately exposed to the rays of the sun in 24 hours. But day and night do not result from a play of light and shade caused by a turn of the earth. As it can be realized by anyone, daylight is produced by the arrival and passage of the sun, and night by the disappearance of it. It is daylight when the sun rises, and night when it sets. There is no need at all for the earth to revolve in order to create these facts of nature, the cause of which is evident and sufficient unto itself. A factor, however, other than the presence and absence of the sun, might be taken into account in the alternation of day and night. It is known that the ancients insisted on the fact that day was caused by a luminous vapor, and night by an opaque sort of fog. But this explanation is not satisfactory as far as night is concerned, and the stars would not be visible, or at least they would be obscured. What may be assumed in reality is the presence of a warm cosmic breath during the day, and of a cold one during the night, to correspond respectively to the warm breath of the summer and the cold breath of the winter, as no doubt day and night are on a small scale what the two main divisions of the year are on a large one. There is, moreover, a noticeable increase of temperature after midday, which points to the existence of a breath in its phase of expiration. The passage of this breath of day would begin in the early morning and dawn, and the usual pause between inspiration and expiration taking place about midday. And we have in this connection the infallible test of the behavior of man, who by reflex action stops work at this moment for a time. The passage of the warm day breath would, then, end at dusk upon the arrival of the cold night breath stream. It might be considered that the breath of day has a certain luminosity in view of the fact that it is daylight long before sunrise, and also that the light persists after sunset, as well as during total eclipses of the sun. It can be seen from photographs taken during such eclipses that the details of the landscape, buildings, and objects remain visible, so that the presence of a luminous factor not dependent on the sun, but provided by the breath of a day, can be assumed. The cold breath of night would inversely flow from nightfall to dawn, with the usual intervals some time after midnight. There is a sharp drop of temperature about this hour, which corresponds to the increased intensity of the cold night breath in its breathing out phase. There is an opposition in the circulation of the day and night breaths round the world, so that when one is north of the equator, the other is south of the equator, and vice versa. The day and night breaths are certainly connected with, and influenced by the greater breaths of summer and winter, and it is therefore then combined actions which regulate the height of the sun and the hours of its rising and setting, but not directly, as said before, but through intermediate circumstances which are explained later on. As to the origin of these breath streams, it may only be surmised that they emanate from living cosmic centers possessing the organic function of respiration, and that they are situated in some distant regions outside our immediate universe. It is also possible that there may be a connection between the winds and these cosmic breaths. There are winds which prevail regularly during certain seasons of the year and which, under the circumstances, might correspond to the semi-yearly breaths of summer and winter. Further, high-flying American airmen have reported the existence of a vast, high-altitude current of air, 6 miles deep and 300 miles wide, circling at a fantastic speed round the northern hemisphere. And from Australia, similar reports indicate the presence of a corresponding high-velocity airstream south of the equator. There might be an analogy between these recently discovered air currents and the semi-annual cosmic breath streams. As to the breath of day, it might have a connection with the lesser winds which rise in the morning and drop in the evening. It would also appear that the breath streams are accompanied by vibrations or cosmic pulsations. The breaths of day and night by 12 pulsations each, which are the hours, and the semi-annual breaths of summer and winter by 6 great pulsations each, of a duration of 30 days. These are the months. It could be added that it is probably the regular and consistent flow of these cosmic breaths which constitutes the passage of time. On the revolution of the planets round the Earth. All of the planets, including the Sun, revolve round the Earth. These circumstances cannot be denied, since they are plainly visible, either in the ordinary with the naked eye or with the help of the telescope. It can be said, in this connection, that in the case of a science which should be based exclusively on observation and not on speculation such as astronomy. The evidence of the senses is the only factor upon which conclusions can, and must be, based. This method of investigation by means of the senses is neither primitive nor naive, as has been suggested. It is used in all existing sciences, except in occult research, where invisible phenomena are described as real, and exactly, it may be remarked, as in the case of the gravitation system. If the planets can be seen revolving round the Earth, it is for the decisive factor that they do revolve in such a way. It is asserted that this is not so, and it is maintained that the Earth and the planets revolve round the Sun. We note with astonishment, however, the bizarre and definitely suspicious fact that these planetary movements are not visible. They cannot be seen, and yet they are called real. How then can these movements be proved and their speed be ascertained, since they are invisible? On the other hand, the existing geocentric planetary motions which can be observed and measured, and which consequently constitute a perfectly valid system, are condemned as unreal and apparent. A pertinent remark may, incidentally, be made on the subject. Why do the astronomical tables which are published year after year give the so-called apparent movements of the planets in the zodiac? Why take the trouble of calculating and putting them on record at all if they are not real? Why is it also that no mention is made of the so-called real movements of the planets? To make sense, it would seem that it is just these and not the former which ought to be shown in official astronomical publications. A single example would be sufficient to prove that the laws of gravitation are not in conformity with existing circumstances. It is known that Mercury and Venus transit the face of the Sun on several occasions during the course of a century. These phenomena last several hours, and they are even observed with great interest by astronomers the world over, but without any special reaction, it seems, as to their material possibility. The shortest distance of Mercury from the Sun is said to be somewhere in the region of 50 million kilometers, and that of Venus 100 million kilometers. Consequently, if these two planets do really revolve the Sun, they cannot transit it except by means of an enormous distortion of their orbits, lasting several hours. This constitutes, therefore, a serious deviation from the laws of gravitation, and their practicability is exposed. The transit of the Sun by Mercury and Venus is only possible through a general motion of revolution of these planets round a central point, which, in the circumstances, is the Earth. It is not either explained how the laws of gravitation manage to adapt themselves to the retrograde motions of the planets. Mercury several times per year retrogresses and becomes stationary altogether for a month. This also occurs less frequently, but at regular intervals, in the case of Venus and Mars, and for the heavier planets during much longer periods. These numerous and prolonged retrogradations, interruptions in the movements of the planet, ought therefore to dislocate the orbits and the speeds, since the movements around the Sun are supposed to be elliptical and uniform, but no mention is ever made of these difficulties. Another inconsistency can be pointed out. The fact that the planets move round the Earth is rejected on the strength that these revolutions are only apparent, but, on the other hand, the motion of the Moon round the Earth is accepted as real. There is, however, no difference whatsoever between the course of the Moon and that of the other planets. They can be seen altogether and at the same time moving round the Earth. Why should it be decreed against all evidence that the Moon alone does so, and what is the motive which underlies these illogical exceptions? Is it also possible to unravel in some way the tangle of the movements of the Sun? Although it can be seen moving from east to west, an important portion has been excised here. It should probably read official statements from old encyclopedias have stated. Then it carries on with, the Sun has retrogradations in the opposite direction at a speed of 1 degree per day, which signifies that it stays practically for 24 hours, 1 12-hour day and 1 12-hour night per year, in the same part of the heavens. It is further retrograding also with the constellations by 50 seconds of a degree per year, at the present moment in the sign of Pisces, which thus becomes its domicile for a period of 2,160 years, which means that it will stay 72 years at each of the 30 degrees of this sign. It has an apparent motion from east to west of 1 degree and 4 minutes. It rotates on its axis in 24 days in the region of its equator, but in 25 days at the poles. It proceeds at a prodigious pace, and this, its principal motion, in the direction of a particular spot,
of the sidereal expanse, which has been identified as being the constellation of Hercules in the sign of Scorpio, which it will reach in X million years, while we learn from the astronomical ephemeris that it moves through this sign in its entirety every year from October 24th to November 23rd. End text. Back to the author. How can it be said that the sun, unless it is endowed with the faculty of ubiquity, is simultaneously invisibly present in different parts of the universe, moving forward and backward all at once, when it can be seen every day moving across the heavens above the earth? One is now able to understand the reasons why no reference at all is made to the movements of the sun in certain modern encyclopedias. Of all these multiple solar movements, nothing at all can be seen. The only thing that one does see, in fact, is that the sun rises in the east in the morning and sets in the west in the evening, having slowly moved across the dome of the sky during the day at the real speed, since it is observed and measured, of 1 degree per day. The sun has absolutely no other movement. To any well-balanced mind, the conclusion is that the system of gravitation, in view of all its contradictions and inconsistencies, is imaginary and not acceptable. Galileo's reaction in this connection may be recalled, when in a letter of the 4th of August, 1597 to Kepler, who was pressing him to support the new dogmas, he replied that he would not hesitate to do so if he were not afraid of being lauded with ridicule. It should also be remembered that the principles of gravitation, such as they were definitely formulated by Newton in 1686, were not accepted into scientific circles, particularly in France, without resistance. The theory made its way only with the greatest difficulty, continuous objections being for a considerable time raised from all sides. It appears, however, that pressure and the policy of laissez-faire gave it a clear scope in the end. It would, nevertheless, be most instructive and interesting to read the contemporary comments on this question. The objection could be raised that masterminds, scientists, and academicians the world over have for nearly 300 years accepted these theories without hesitation, and that it is inconceivable that they could have been mistaken, or that they should have been deceived. Without meaning to cast any reflection on the intellectual faculties or on the judgment of these leading figures in the world of science, it can be said, either that they were not competent in astronomical matters, a fact which does not constitute mental inferiority, or they lacked the moral courage to admit what they thought in their conscience of these incomprehensible abstractions, Galileo as well as the others. Without doubt he was convinced of the immobility of the earth, but he had to submit to the diktat of error in order to escape from the difficulties which would have assailed him till the end of his days, as he implied in one of his letters, if he had not given in. We repeat that all the planets, including the sun, whether their composition be material or not, revolve round the earth, which, as stated by traditional, immemorial, the word of Scripture, and the authority of the Church, is in a complete state of immobility at the center of our universe. The revolution of the planets takes place in a direction which we describe as from east to west, but it should be noted that in the paintings which cover the walls of very ancient Egyptian tombs, the sun is seen to rise in the west and set in the east. It is probably from this fact that Plato evolved his theory that during certain periods of time the revolution of the planets takes place in the opposite direction, but the rational explanation which can be attached to this supposed reversal of the planet's motion assumed by Plato is simply that the Greek geographers reproduced the maps of the world, as it was known in those days, the wrong way up, so that the poles and the 4 points of the compass were reversed, and this error would not be surprising considering the lack of accurate topographical information in those times. Thus, if a mistake has been made in the orientation of the earth by the Greeks, the result would be that the southern hemisphere and its constellations is really the northern hemisphere, and vice versa. It should be noted that there are several maps, dating from the Middle Ages, where the earth is shown in the manner of the ancient Egyptians, the opposite way up for us, and consequently France appears reversed, at the north of England and Scotland, also reversed, in what would be the austral hemisphere. The satellites of the earth are also free from any movement of rotation. We can take, for instance, the case of the planet Jupiter, which is said to accomplish one complete rotation in 10 hours, so that its day and night have an equal duration of 5 hours. It can be observed, however, without a telescope, that there is no change whatsoever in the luminosity of this satellite all through the night, so that it does have a movement of rotation, Neither have the other satellites to which the same theory applies. It may also be remarked that the reverse side of the satellites cannot be seen, and this fact cannot be very well reconciled with the idea of a possible rotation.